So 6 years ago, I showed up at my first NCWA meeting. I was really excited because I had written a book. I had spent a year writing this novel. It was ready to be published. I was ready to quit my day job. And I learned a couple things really quickly. One is it was not ready to be published. The other thing is most authors have one thing in common, a day job that doesn't involve writing. But I did learn a few things, like I was part of a community right away that could help me find that path to publication. And it was part of understanding three things, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. First of all is the spirit of being a writer. Second is the craft of being a writer. And third is the writing industry and how it works. But first of all, let me tell you the story about my novel. And like a lot of novels, my story begins with a what if. So for example, what if a young girl, a high school girl, moved to a remote town on the coast of Washington and found out her boyfriend was a vampire? What would that be? Twilight. All the Twilight books and the Twilight movies. What if the rapture occurred tomorrow? What would that be? All the Left Behind books, all those great best-selling books, and one really bad movie. Or maybe it was two. We only saw the first. Right? But my what if came from a biblical verse. Every time I heard John 21:20, the last part of the Gospel of John, where Peter is walking on the seashore, with the resurrected Jesus, and they're talking about what a terrible death Peter is going to die. Peter looks back, remember, at the beloved disciple and says, well, what's going to happen to him? And Jesus says, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you? We're talking about you. That's a paraphrase. And the end of the verse says, because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And I always thought, well, what if that's what he really meant? What if the Apostle John was still alive? What would he be doing? Where would he be living? What would he have been doing for the last 2,000 years? How would he hide his identity? What would be his mission? Maybe he's on secret missions for Jesus because he wanted him to leave the beloved disciple around. Well, I always thought about that as a what if. And I was working on a project in Santa Monica, California at the Rand Corporation, where I'm an IT project manager. And one of the people there mentioned that her husband was a TV scriptwriter. And I said, wow, I've got this really interesting idea, this what if. And she was a fellow Christian too, and we talked about it. And so I wrote this up. I wrote up plot synopses. I wrote up the whole concept. I didn't know what I was doing. But I wrote all this up, and I gave it to him, and he was really excited. And so he said, I'm going to take this to some producers and pitch the idea, and we'll see what happens. And he had me register it with the Screenwriters Guild, and I started plotting the day that I was going to quit my job. Because I was going to be a producer for this show. Now, how many of you saw my TV show, The Last Apostle? No one did. Because what happened is he met with these people, he was all excited, and they came back and said, well, we're looking for stuff like Lost. We want it really edgy, and this is just not edgy. This is kind of like Touched by an Angel and Quantum Leap. And so we talked about that, and he says, yeah, I don't think this is going to work as a TV script, but why don't you write it as a book? And I thought, to this day, I don't know whether to bless him or curse him. But I thought, I can't write a book. That's way too long. And I've always been a writer, been published in magazines and that, but writing a book, man, that's a lot of work. But then I started thinking, maybe I could do this. And at the time, I was traveling about half the time, so I didn't have duties like washing the dog or doing the lawn when I was on the road. So I started writing, and within a year, I had turned out my first manuscript, done some editing, and I showed up to this meeting all excited about how I was going to get my book published. The book is still not published, but I want to talk a little bit about that journey. So first of all, I want to talk about the spirit of being a writer. And if you read Jeremiah 29:11, it says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. So the spirit is all about that faith and persistence. And you would think, with God on our side, we would have no problems with confidence. We would be very confident about what we're doing, but we struggle with that every day. And faith and persistence is required for the spirit of a writer. And what I've always said is prayer, persistence, and patience eventually equals published. It may not be in your timing, but prayer, persistence, and patience equals that being published. And my wife and I finished listening to an audiobook not too long ago called The Happiness Advantage. And it's by Sean Achor, who's a Harvard professor. He's a Master of Divinity at Harvard. And in his book, The Happiness Advantage, he talks about there's been over 200 studies involving 275,000 people worldwide. So it's people from different cultures. It's not just Americans. And what they find is happiness leads to success in nearly every domain, including work, health, friendship, sociability, creativity, and energy. Happiness, faith provides that solid foundation that you need to go out and conquer the world. Now, what does our culture teach about happiness? It teaches that when you're successful, then you're happy. It teaches if I get that promotion, I'm successful, I'll be happy. If I move into that nice new house, I'll be successful, I'll be happy. If I marry that girl, I'll be happy. Well, in my case, it did work. But in general, they teach success leads to happiness. And all these studies teach the opposite. Happiness equals success. And I want you to think of some examples here of what proves that wrong, or proves that success equals happiness. Think of the Kardashians. Man, they are successful, and man, are they messed up. Followed only by Lindsay Lohan. And then how about lottery winners? And I know a lot of you are saying, yeah, I heard that lottery winners are usually unhappy, but I'd be willing to make a go of it. I can do a much better job. But happiness is not just about singing a song, don't worry, be happy. It's not about a Pollyanna attitude. It's really about building that foundation that gives you faith and gives you strength. It's concrete actions. It's gratitude. It's developing good habits. It's focusing on achievement. But what he teaches, and I'd highly recommend the book, is happiness first leads to success. And to get through the disappointment and the turndowns and the people who just dismiss you as a writer, you need that solid foundation. I want to give you an example of just the opposite. How many of you have seen the movie Invincible? Okay, Gigi's seen it. Anyone who's involved in football should see it, but it's about a guy who played like 1 year of football in high school, and went to college, never played football there, and he got a tryout with the Philadelphia Eagles. And shortly before he got this tryout, he was working as a substitute teacher, and he comes home a couple days after a fight with his wife, who was upset that he was playing football out in the parking lot with his friends, and all the furniture's gone. About the only thing that's left is a table, his phone, which is disconnected, and a note. And the note was from his wife, and this part is true. She said, "You'll never go anywhere, never make a name for yourself, and never make any money." Now, the guy who started that is Mark Wahlberg, so I'm sure all the women will want to go out and see it now. But he read that note, and he used it to inspire himself to overcome it. And he finally didn't become successful as an NFL player until he threw that note away and just put it behind him. And he wound up playing for 3 years for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I prefer to surround myself with people who will give me honest feedback, but will also encourage me. And so as part of this team, Northwest Christian Writers, I've met people like Mick Silva, Jim Rubart, and I've connected with people through contests that live on the other side of the country who are award-winning authors. One of the things I did was I worked with Mick Silva on my book, and he said something that I wanted to hold on to, so I turned it into a bookmark. It said, "I believe you're a career writer." He gave me a lot of great suggestions, but at the end he said, "I believe you're a career writer." So when I get frustrated, when people say, "Oh, this business is too tough," I pull out that bookmark and remember that. Much better than a note from your wife saying, "You'll never make any money." I want to give you a quote from a fairly well-known author and see if anyone can guess who this was. It said, "By the time I was 14, the nail in my wall would no longer support the weight of the rejection slips impaled upon it. So most of you at 14 would quit, right? He said, I replaced the nail with a spike and kept on writing. Anyone know who that was?
I do.
Stephen King, right? Stephen King says, I replaced the nail with a spike and kept on writing. And his story is really inspirational. He was basically working as a school teacher, starving. I think the phone barely worked, but only on occasion. And he made it because he was persistent. One of the blogs I like to read is by Rochelle Gardner, who's a agent in the Christian industry, who's a great teacher. And she says the opposite of success is not failure, but learning. And when you have success, build upon it. Don't let it go to your head. But when you have failure, you need to learn from it and see how you can do better. Now, I'm going to mention some resources for each of these three sections. And don't worry about getting them all down because, A, there's no video today. Actually, I did create a PowerPoint. I'm so blessed that I didn't plan on using one. But what I will do is I'll post these on my blog, and I'll go ahead and I'll send an email out to everyone who's on the NCWA list. If you want to make sure that you get a copy, you can give me a card afterwards or get my card. So two things about the spirit of writing. One is On Writing by Stephen King. And Doc Hensley, who has taught at our conference before, and he actually helped mentor me, recommended the audio version. And the audio version is narrated by Stephen King. He spends the first half of the book talking about his journey as a writer, from a spike with rejection slips to being a multi-published author. And then he talks about the craft of writing. The other one is called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And Mick actually recommended this to me. And I have a copy that I'm going to give out at the end of the meeting to whoever has the best question during the Q&A session. I do have to give you a warning that both of those authors use what we would consider inappropriate language. So you need to overlook that to get through to the lessons that they have.